The first flake fell at 6:47 inches the morning. By the time Vivian Hartwell stepped out of the Caldwell Group's executive elevator at 8:12, the city had disappeared beneath 4 inches of white. Chicago in January did not negotiate. It buried you or it didn't, and this particular Tuesday, it was in no mood for mercy. She wore charcoal. She always wore charcoal. A structured wool coat that ended precisely at the knee, calfskin gloves the color of old pewter, dark hair pulled back so tightly it looked architectural. Her assistant, a young man named Preston, who had learned within his first week never to speak before she did, held the rear door of the black Escalade open without a word. Vivienne did not look at him. She slid into the back seat, set her briefcase across her lap with the practiced efficiency of someone who had rehearsed every gesture, and pulled her phone from her inner pocket. 3 missed calls from Owen Garrett, the CFO, 2 from the board liaison, 1 from a number she did not recognize Chicago area code. No contact name. She ignored that one. Meridian Tower, she said to the driver. A man named Gerald who had been with her for 3 years and knew better than to offer small talk about the weather. The Escalade pulled into traffic. She read. Reviewed. Annotated 2 contracts simultaneously, one finger scrolling, the other holding a stylus. The meeting at Meridian was with the Voss Group, a European private equity firm that had been circling the Caldwell Group for 11 months like a patient, well-dressed shark. Vivienne had no intention of being eaten. She had every intention of making Voss believe, for just long enough, that she was considering their offer. She was, in truth, preparing to destroy it. The wipers swept. Snow accumulated on the window edge in thin, precise lines. Gerald made the turn onto Lakeshore, with appropriate caution. The road was plowed but not salted. The city crews had fallen behind overnight. Vivienne was mid-sentence on the Voss counterproposal when the Escalade began to drift. It was subtle at first. A slight delay in response when Gerald corrected the wheel. She felt it in her body before she registered it consciously. A trained animal instinct she had inherited from years of reading rooms, reading people, reading the silences before bad news arrived. Something is wrong, her body said. Approximately 2 seconds before the vehicle confirmed it, Gerald pumped the brakes. Nothing. He pumped again, harder. The Escalade's nose swung left, despite his steering right. Vivienne's briefcase slid from her lap. Her phone hit the floor. She braced both hands against the seat, back in front of her, and did not make a sound. Because she did not make sounds, not even in the moments where sounds were warranted. The concrete median barrier arrived with a sound like the world breaking its jaw. The airbags deployed. Her head snapped back. The world became white, not the white of snow, but the white of impact, of shock, of sudden electrical silence in every nerve. Her ears rang a single, sustained note. She was conscious. She catalogued this fact first, methodically, the way she catalogued everything. She was conscious. Her neck hurt. Her left shoulder had struck the door. Her right hand was bleeding from where the stylus had driven into her palm. She could feel her heartbeat in her temples, in her wrists, in the backs of her knees. Gerald was making a noise low, dazed, not quite coherent. The hood of the Escalade had crumpled against the median barrier. Steam was rising from something under it. Then she heard the voices outside. She heard the rising panic of people arriving from the sidewalk and the adjacent parking structure. She heard someone say, "Call 911," and someone else say, "Is she alive?" And she made a decision, the kind of decision she made in boardrooms, in depositions, in negotiations at midnight, when the other side thought they had her. She went still. She let her head fall sideways, let her jaw go slack. She did not close her eyes all the way. She left them open by a fraction, just enough to see light and shadow, just enough to register movement without registering as conscious. She listened. The voices sorted themselves. 3 people from the street. Preston, who had apparently been following in a secondary vehicle, was now outside, speaking in a high, cracked voice that told her he had never faced anything more serious than a catering cancellation. The security detail's driver was on his phone. 2 more voices, she didn't recognize passers-by, she guessed. And then a silence. Not the absence of noise, but the deliberate kind. The kind a room makes when one person in it stops moving. Footsteps. Slow. Measured. Not hurried. Not hesitant. The gait of someone who had already assessed the situation before arriving at it. She heard the door beside her, the rear passenger door, open. The winter air came in. She felt a presence beside her, close enough that she could sense the slight warmth of another body. A voice, low, almost conversational, the way you'd speak to someone you were trying not to wake. "You can keep pretending," the voice said. "But if you don't come around in the next 2 minutes, they're going to load you into the wrong vehicle." She did not move. She kept her breathing shallow, measured. "The black sedan," the voice continued, still low. "Third car back." It arrived before the ambulance was called. That's not how concerned bystanders behave. A pause. That's how people who are waiting behave. She had been in difficult rooms. She had been in bankruptcy negotiations where the other side held every card. She had fired 3 board members in a single morning. She had sat across from prosecutors and answered every question with a composure that had, she was told afterward, unnerved them. She had never, not once, felt the specific quality of fear that moved through her in that moment. Because the voice was right, she had not noticed the sedan. She had not, in fact, noticed anything except the impact and the cold and the arithmetic of her injuries. And this person, this voice, belonging to a figure in her peripheral vision that she could not yet fully see, had noticed the sedan before she did. She kept still, but she let her eyes open a fraction more. Work uniform, dark navy. The patch on the left sleeve read Caldwell Group Facilities Services. A janitor. Not a security guard, not a paramedic, not a colleague. The man crouched beside her open door was the building's janitor, and he was looking not at her but at the third car back. His jaw was set. His hands rested on his knees. He did not touch her. He did not perform distress for anyone watching. He was watching the sedan. In her career, Vivienne had met hundreds of men who wanted her to believe they were more than they appeared. This man was doing no such thing. He was simply being more than he appeared, without any apparent interest in whether she noticed. "The ambulance is 60 seconds out," he said, still without looking at her. "When it gets here, I'm going to say, I was first on scene. That gets me in the vehicle with you. That's the only reason I'm telling you this. A beat. You decide." She opened her eyes. His name, she would learn later, was Daniel Reeves. He was 38 years old. He had worked in the Caldwell Group's building for 14 months. His employee file, which she had pulled from HR before the anesthesia wore off completely at the hospital she had called her assistant, from the emergency bay, before anyone noticed she was coherent, contained nothing unusual. Work history prior to employment. Listed as private security consulting, self-employed. Education. Listed as bachelor's degree in criminal justice, University of Illinois. Emergency contact. Sophie Reeves, daughter. Age 7. No red flags, no gaps that couldn't be explained. A man who had arrived quietly and, apparently, intended to remain that way. She had watched him at the accident scene while pretending to be unconscious. He had not stood around. He had not crouched over her performing the concerned citizen routine. He had moved carefully, without drawing attention around the perimeter of the vehicle. He had crouched once near the front left wheel well. Stood, moved to the rear, crouched again. She had heard him say something very quietly to himself that she could not catch. He had looked at the wreckage, the way a forensic investigator looks at a scene, not seeing the event, but the architecture of the event. Not the crash, the cause. When the ambulance arrived, he had presented himself to the paramedics with an economy of language that she recognized as practiced. First on scene, name and badge number provided, accompanying the patient. The paramedics, busy with their protocols, had accepted this without challenge. He sat across from her in the ambulance on the fold-down bench seat, his back straight, his hands on his knees, his eyes moving between the equipment and the rear windows. She lay still. She breathed. She watched him through nearly closed lids. He identified the modification on the 4th minute of the drive. She did not know what it was. She saw only that he leaned forward slightly, focused on something near the IV stand mounted to the sidewall, and went very still. His expression did not change. He looked the way she looked when she spotted a fraudulent figure buried in a 1,200-line spreadsheet. Not alarmed, but confirmed. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a small multi-tool, the kind hardware store employees clip to belt loops. He opened it to a narrow flat blade. In 2 movements, precise and unhurried, he removed something from the IV apparatus and slid it into his breast pocket. He sat back, replaced the multi-tool, looked out the window. The paramedic in the front passenger seat was relaying her vitals over the radio. Neither of them had noticed anything. Vivian's heart rate, she was quite certain, had changed. She hoped the monitor was not displaying it. He spoke without turning his head. His voice was barely above the sound of the road. Don't let them sedate you at the hospital. Tell them you have an allergy to standard sedation protocols. Make them document it. That creates a paper trail if someone tries something anyway. A pause. The ambulance hit a slight grade. You weren't in an accident, Miss Hartwell. You were placed in one. She had known, she realized. Somewhere beneath the layer of rational thought, she maintained like a pressure seal over everything else. She had known because of the brake delay. Gerald was a meticulous driver who serviced the vehicle on schedule. She signed the maintenance reports herself. The brakes on a well-maintained Escalade did not simply fail in cold weather. Not like that. Not with that particular quality of total, sudden absence. She had known in the way that people who have been in enough rooms with enough dangerous information eventually learn to know things before they can explain them. But knowing was different from having someone say it out loud, in an ambulance on a January morning. The hospital room they gave her was on the 4th floor, west wing, bone-white walls, a window that faced the parking structure. She had requested a room without a city view window, and the charge nurse had found that unusual enough to remark upon, but had complied. Vivian Hartwell did not want anyone on a high floor across the street to have a clean line of sight. She told the attending physician that she had a documented reaction to benzodiazepines, that her medical records on file at Northwestern would confirm, and that she required no sedation beyond local anesthetic for the laceration on her right palm. The physician, young, a little harried, running behind, checked, noted, documented, and moved on. The laceration required 6 stitches. Her left shoulder was deeply bruised, no fracture. She had a mild concussion, nothing that required extended hospitalization. She asked to be monitored overnight for observation. The physician agreed. She asked that visitors be limited to individuals cleared by her executive assistant. The charge nurse noted it. Daniel Reeves sat in the waiting area outside her room for 4 hours. She knew because Preston, who had arrived, pale and chastened, within 40 minutes had reported it to her in a whispered briefing at her bedside. He described the janitor's presence with the mild bewilderment of someone who did not know what category to place it in. He just sits there, Preston said. He told the desk nurse, he's making sure nobody tampers with the room access log. Is he right to be? Preston blinked. What? Is he right to be concerned? Has anyone attempted to access this room who wasn't on my approved list? I don't actually know. I didn't think to. Check the log. Bring it to me. Preston left. She lay back against the pillow, stared at the ceiling, and ran the inventory she had been running since the moment she opened her eyes on the road. The Voss acquisition proposal had been in circulation for 11 months. She had opposed it from the beginning. But the board was divided, and Owen Garrett, CFO for 6 years, a man she had trusted as a structural component of the company the way she trusted load-bearing walls, had been increasingly vocal about the financial logic of a sale. He was not wrong about the numbers. He was, she now suspected, very wrong about his reasons. She thought about the maintenance logs she had signed. She thought about who submitted them. She thought about who had access to the vehicle scheduling system. She thought about the phone call she had not recognized Chicago area code. No contact name. She thought about the IV apparatus in the ambulance, and the item that Daniel Reeves had removed from it and placed in his breast pocket. She pressed the call button for the nurse. I need pen and paper, she said when the nurse appeared. And I need the name of the head of hospital security. She did not sleep. Not because of pain, the ache in her shoulder was manageable, nothing compared to the quarterly reviews where she had sat for 11 hours in rooms that ran out of coffee, but because sleep required a cessation of attention she was not prepared to grant. At 2:17 the morning, the door to her room opened. She closed her eyes, regulated her breathing, kept her hands still. A figure entered. She heard the door close, heard footsteps careful, soft-soled, trying to be quiet. Not a nurse's footstep pattern. Nurses entered rooms with a particular professional directness. This was something else. The footsteps stopped. A long silence. She could hear the person thinking. Then, a sound from the hallway. A mop bucket. Wheels on linoleum. Approaching at the pace of someone doing exactly what they were supposed to be doing at 17 inches the morning cleaning floors. The footsteps inside the room reversed. The door opened and closed again, quickly. The mop bucket sounds stopped outside her room. A pause. Then continued. Slowly. In the direction the intruder had gone. She exhaled. In the morning, Daniel Reeves had a name for the person who had entered her room. She did not ask him how he had obtained it. She had learned, in a single evening, not to ask him how he obtained things. 14 months. He had been in the building for 14 months. She had walked past him, she was certain of it, dozens of times. Perhaps hundreds. She did not remember his face, and this bothered her less than she expected. She was not a person who remembered the faces of people who cleaned floors. She was not proud of this. She simply acknowledged it as a feature of the person she had become. She spent the second day at the hospital in a controlled, deliberate excavation of the previous year. Not of her own decisions, those she could account for with precision, but of the decisions made around her, the ones that had required her sign-off but had been prepared by others. The maintenance logs, the IT security upgrades, the vehicle rotation schedule, the board meeting minutes that had moved from weekly to bi-weekly, a change Owen Garrett had proposed as an efficiency measure. She had approved it. She had approved dozens of things that, individually, were invisible, and that together, she now saw, had the shape of a carefully constructed perimeter. Daniel came to her room at 10 in the morning with coffee from the hospital cafeteria, black, no sugar, which she had not told him she preferred, but which was correct, and a folded sheet of paper that he set on her tray table without ceremony. She opened it. It was a timeline. Handwritten. Dates in the left margin, events in the center column, notation in the right. Clean, precise. No abbreviations she couldn't immediately parse. It covered 16 months. The Voss Group's first approach was noted. Below it, the date Owen Garrett had opened a secondary brokerage account, which she confirmed from memory was real because she had seen the filing as a disclosure 2 quarters ago and had accepted his explanation that it was a personal investment account required by his wife's estate management. Below that, the date the building's vehicle maintenance contract had been quietly renegotiated by the procurement office, which reported to a vice president who reported to Owen Garrett. Below that, 3 dates she did not recognize. "What are these?" she asked. "Access events," he said. "Unauthorized entry to the executive vehicle bay between midnight and 5 a.m. Logged in the system under a maintenance override code that was issued to the head of facilities, me, but that I didn't issue." She looked at him. "Someone used your credentials. Someone used credentials issued in my name. Which means someone either has my access card or they cloned it." He sat in the visitor's chair without being invited. "The last access event was 3 nights before your accident." She set the paper down. "You've been watching this. I watch everything in that building," he said. "It's a habit. How long have you known something was wrong?" 7 months. He paused. "I wasn't sure it was going to go this far." She wanted to be angry at that. The anger was there, compressed somewhere below her sternum, but she recognized that anger in this moment would be indulgent, and indulgence was a luxury the situation did not permit. "Tell me about Owen Garrett," she said. "Tell me what you already know," he said, "and I'll fill in the parts you don't." She found out the rest in pieces. Not from him directly she was discovering, constitutionally opposed to explaining himself, but from sources she trusted, and that trusted her. Her general counsel, who made 3 calls on her behalf before lunch, a contact at the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation, who owed her a favor from a securities matter 4 years prior, and a retired federal investigator named Bernard Cho, who had consulted for the Caldwell Group's legal department and who, when she described the situation in clinical detail, said, The man you're describing sounds like Daniel Reeves. I haven't heard that name in a long time. The shape of him that emerged. 14 years with a private intelligence firm that contracted with Fortune 500 companies and 2 federal agencies whose names Cho did not say out loud. Specialist in internal threat identification, the kind of work that has no official title and no public profile, and that exists specifically because most organizations, at sufficient scale, eventually generate their own predators. His record was, by Cho's account, exceptional. Not celebrated. Exceptional things in that field were not celebrated. They were quietly noted by people who understood their value. He had surfaced 2 internal embezzlement schemes, one involving a company whose name she recognized immediately. He had identified a procurement corruption network at a defense contractor before a federal audit caught it. He had, in one instance, prevented what Cho described only as an outcome that would have cost lives. Then, 6 years ago, a gap. His wife, Cho, said carefully, had died. Not in a way that was anyone's fault, but in the way that some things aren't anyone's fault and are devastating precisely because of it. A car accident in December. An icy road in a suburb north of the city. A collision at an intersection that no one survived. She had been driving alone. Sophie had been with a babysitter. He had gone into the gap and not come out the way he went in. She understood this, without having to have it explained further. She understood it the way she understood structural load-bearing, not because she had been through it herself, but because she recognized the architecture of it in the way he sat in chairs, in the economy of his speech, in the total absence of any attempt to make himself known. He had become invisible on purpose, not because he had something to hide, because visibility had a cost he was no longer willing to pay. He came back at 2 in the afternoon with a second sheet of paper. And she noted a juice box that she was fairly certain was a children's brand with a cartoon character on the foil tab. She did not remark on the juice box. The head of facilities received a phone call 4 months ago, he said, from a number registered to a subsidiary of the Voss Group's North American holding company. The call lasted 11 minutes. The head of facilities reports to Director of Operations, who reports to the COO. She processed this. That's a longer chain than Owen. It's a parallel chain, which suggests this wasn't organized from inside Caldwell alone. Someone at Voss was coordinating. He paused. They wanted the acquisition. You were the obstacle. They tried to eliminate the obstacle. They tried to create a situation where the board would act quickly, in grief, without your steadying influence and without time to scrutinize the terms. He was matter-of-fact about it. Not cold, just precise. The sale was designed to happen in the window between your death and the appointment of an interim CEO, 48 to 72 hours. The motion was already drafted. She was quiet for a long moment. How do you know about the motion? Because someone left the document open on a screen in a conference room on the 14th floor at 11:45 on a Sunday night. And I was cleaning that floor. She closed her eyes briefly. Opened them. They didn't see you. People don't see me, he said. That's the point. She checked herself out of the hospital on the morning of the 3rd day. She told the physician she felt well. She told Preston to have her car the secondary vehicle, not the Escalade, which was evidence brought around. She told her general counsel to arrange a meeting with the board's independent directors, the 3 members not aligned with Garrett's faction, for 4 o'clock that afternoon. She told no one else. Daniel had, in the 2 days since the accident, assembled a file. She did not ask him where or how. The file contained the following: camera footage from the executive vehicle bay on the 3 nights marked on his timeline, which showed a figure in a maintenance uniform that was not Daniel entering the bay with what appeared to be standard equipment. Maintenance logs with override codes traced to a credentials clone that had been obtained by physical duplication of the facility's access card. The card had been briefly removed from Daniel's locker, which he had noted as a locker access event in his own running log 3 weeks prior. Financial records, obtained through a source he declined to name, showing a series of transfers between Owen Garrett's secondary account and an LLC registered in Delaware with a Voss Group connection. And the item he had removed from the ambulance's IV apparatus which he had delivered to an independent pharmacological testing service that provided a written analysis of its composition. It contained a sedative compound, not a fatal dose. A dose calibrated, the report said, to produce prolonged unconsciousness consistent with head injury complications. She would have been unconscious, in a hospital bed, unable to challenge anything the board decided. She read the report 3 times. She was not prone to feeling cold in ways unrelated to temperature. She was cold now. He had assembled all of this quietly, without instruction from her, while ostensibly being a man who cleaned floors. He had done it with the focused, unhurried competence of someone who had been building exactly this kind of file for 14 months and had simply been waiting for the event that made it necessary to act on. She thought about the black sedan, 3rd car back. She thought about the word, waiting. Who in the black sedan? She asked. A contractor, he said. Not someone with a Caldwell Group connection. For hire. Brought in from outside specifically, so there would be no internal fingerprints, and the contractor is, currently, in a conversation with federal authorities, he said. They were identified by plate and followed to a motel in Wicker Park. The gentleman who arranged that conversation asked me not to disclose his name. She studied him. You have active federal contacts. I have relationships from a previous professional life, he said, that I prefer not to discuss. But you're using them. I'm using them carefully, he said. There's a difference. She said nothing for a moment. The car moved through city streets that were no longer white. The snow had been plowed to gray ridges along the curbs, and the bare trees stood in the cold with a particular winter dignity that she had always found more honest than spring's performance. You could have gone to the authorities the moment you saw the documentation, she said. You didn't have to wait for the accident. No, he agreed. So why? Because I didn't have enough to constitute evidence, he said. I had enough to constitute suspicion, and suspicion in a situation like this, where the people involved have lawyers and relationships and resources, disappears. A pause. I needed them to act. Once they acted, the evidence existed. She considered this. You used me as bait. I put you in a position to defend yourself, he said evenly. That's different. She turned to look at him. He was looking out the window at the gray city. Is it? She asked. You survived, he said. And you're not unconscious in a hospital bed while your company is sold over you. A beat. I believe that constitutes a favorable outcome. She turned back to the window. She thought, against her will, about the 14 months he had spent watching. Cleaning floors. Logging access events in a private notation system no one knew existed. Watching the black sedan arrive before the ambulance was called. Watching and waiting and not making a move until he was certain. It was, she realized, exactly what she would have done. She met Sophie on a Thursday. It was not planned. She had gone to the building, not to the executive floors, but to the maintenance level in the basement where the facilities team kept their equipment to return his access card, which had been collected by security as part of the investigation and which she had personally retrieved because she felt, without quite having the language for why, that he should have it back. He was not there. The facilities coordinator, a heavy-set woman named Karen, who looked at Vivienne with the specific expression of someone trying to determine whether she was supposed to be impressed, told her that Daniel had taken a personal day, first one he'd taken since he started. His daughter was in a chair beside the coordinator's desk, sitting with the particular self-containment of a child who has learned not to require much. She was 7, brown-haired, with her father's quality of focused stillness. She was reading a book, not a children's book, or not exactly. It appeared to be a field guide to North American birds, the illustrated kind with Latin names in italics below each entry. She looked up when Vivienne entered. Children, in Vivienne's experience, either immediately sensed authority and became self-conscious, or they didn't register it at all. Sophie did neither. She looked at Vivienne with the direct, uncomplicated assessment of someone who was simply trying to determine whether she was interesting. Are you from the company? She asked. Yes, Vivienne said. My dad works here, Sophie said. He says the building is very tall. It is, Vivienne said. He says you can see the lake from the top floors. Sophie considered this. He's never been to the top floors. Vivienne sat down in the other chair, which was the kind of impulse she did not normally act on. and which she acted on now without examining it. "What are you reading?" she asked. Sophie showed her the bird guide. She had, Vivienne noticed, dog-eared the page for the red-tailed hawk, and had written in tiny, precise handwriting in the margin, "Lives alone, hunts alone, still finds food." She did not say anything about the annotation. Sophie closed the book and set it on her knee. "My dad says people who clean things see everything," Sophie said. "Does he? Because nobody watches the person cleaning the floor." She said it simply, as a fact she had been told and had retained as obviously true. "So, you can watch everyone else." Vivienne was quiet for a moment. "Your father is very good at his job," she said. Sophie nodded without particular pride, just acknowledgement. "He's good at all his jobs," she said. "He says the important thing is to do the job in front of you, not the one you used to have." The coordinator was pretending to type something. Vivienne looked at the child at the bird guide on her knee, at the annotation she had made with her small, precise handwriting, and at the straightness of her back in a plastic chair, while she waited for her father with no apparent impatience or complaint. She thought, "Lives alone, hunts alone, still finds food." She thought about a man who had walked away from a career built on knowing everything, and had rebuilt himself as someone no one looked at, so that he could continue to know everything, but this time on his own terms and for his own reasons. And she thought about what it had cost him, and what it had produced, and about the particular kind of strength it takes not to announce strength. Sophie looked at her again, with those direct, uncomplicated eyes. "My dad says he can always tell when someone is lying," she said. "He says their breathing changes, or they go very still, or they try too hard to be normal." A pause. "He said the same thing happens when someone is pretending to be hurt but isn't." Vivienne looked at her steadily. "Smart man," she said. "He knew," Sophie said simply. "From the beginning. He just waited for you to decide." She did not tell him she had met Sophie. She did not tell him about the bird guide, or the annotation. Some things are better kept. She told him the board meeting was at 4. He arrived in his work uniform. She had not told him to change, and he had not asked whether he should. He carried a manila folder and a portable hard drive, and he sat in the back row of the boardroom, on the 22nd floor where the independent directors were already assembled, and he did not speak. The room was all glass on one side. Chicago spread out below and around it, still gray, the lake visible as a flat pewter line at the edge. Vivienne stood at the head of the table and looked at the people in their chairs and assessed, as she always did, who was afraid. Owen Garrett sat at her left. He had been informed of the meeting agenda, standard quarterly governance review, board communication protocols, and had not been told anything else. He was 61, silver-haired, with the comfortable authority of a man who had held CFO positions at 3 major companies and had been made to feel, across that career, that his judgment was structurally sound. He looked at her. She looked at him. He was the first to look away. She began with the quarterly report. She was thorough. She was meticulous. She let the room settle into its ordinary rhythms, the legal pad notations, the glasses of water, the slight throat clearing of people who had been in too many meetings and had developed physical vocabularies of mild boredom. Then she said, "I want to discuss the Voss acquisition proposal." Garrett straightened slightly. She saw it a small, involuntary adjustment, the body betraying what the face was working to conceal. "I think," she said, "we should look at the timeline of the proposal and some related events." She nodded to Daniel. He stood, moved to the room's display panel, connected the drive, did not introduce himself. The footage appeared on the screen. The vehicle bay, the figure in the maintenance uniform, the 3 access events on 3 documented nights. Garrett looked at the footage. His expression did not change. "I don't understand the relevance," he said. "The credentials used in these access events," she said, "were cloned from a facility's employee's card. The cloning was accomplished through physical access to that employee's locker. The locker access event was logged. The physical characteristics of the figure in the footage, height, gait, build, are consistent with your assistant, Marcus Heller." A pause. She let it extend. "The day before my accident," she continued, "Mr. Heller accessed a restricted maintenance terminal and entered a service override that disabled the vehicle tracking alert system. The override was entered using credentials belonging to the head of IT security, whose workstation Mr. Heller visited 2 days prior under the stated purpose of scheduling a security upgrade review. She moved to the financial records. She went through them the way she went through everything precisely, without affect, without drama. The transfers, the LLC, the 11-minute phone call, the board motion that had been drafted and, it turned out, distributed to 3 board members for pre-signature members who were now sitting at this table, with the expressions of people who had, very recently, understood the nature of the situation they were in. She did not raise her voice. She did not gesture. She stood at the head of the table in charcoal wool, with her stitched hand flat on the surface, and she simply explained, in sequence, what had been done and how and by whom, and to what end. Garrett said, at one point, "This is a fabrication," she said. "The pharmacological testing report is attached as Exhibit 7. He said nothing further. The independent board members asked questions careful, precise, the questions of people who understood liability and were beginning to understand their own exposure. She answered each one. When a question required something she couldn't answer from memory, she looked at Daniel, and he provided the reference from the folder without comment. He spoke only once, at the end, when the board's independent counsel asked about the chain of custody for the footage. I maintained an encrypted backup of all access logs from the facilities management system for the past 14 months, he said. The original logs are on the building's server, timestamped and intact. The footage was pulled directly from the security archive and has not been edited. The hash values are in the exhibit. The counsel looked at him. You maintained personal backups of building security logs. I maintain records of things I observe, Daniel said. It's a habit. A pause. Who are you? The counsel asked. I clean floors, Daniel said. On the 14th floor, I noticed a document open on an unattended screen. That's documented in my personal log, Exhibit 12. The counsel looked at Vivian. She looked back. She said nothing. Owen Garrett was removed from the building by security at 5:48 p.m. He went quietly. She had expected that men of his type always went quietly when the arithmetic was complete and there was nothing left to calculate. Loud exits were for people who still believed they had an audience. Owen knew, by the time he stood, that the audience was gone. Marcus Heller was detained at his apartment in Lincoln Park at approximately the same time, by arrangement with the federal investigators who had, by now, been provided with Daniel's complete documentation package through a channel she did not ask about. The contractor from the Wicker Park Motel had already been in federal custody for 36 hours. The Voss Group's North American representative issued a statement through legal counsel indicating that the company had no knowledge of or involvement in any activities that could be characterized as harmful or illegal. She filed the statement in a folder labeled Exhibit 15 and forwarded it to her legal team. The story reached the financial press within hours. She did not speak to anyone. She issued a brief written statement through the company's communications office, prepared by her general counsel, confirming that a governance investigation was underway and that she had the full confidence of the independent board. It was 4 sentences. She went home. Her apartment was on the 41st floor of a building on Michigan Avenue. She had lived there for 6 years and had made it, over those years, into a place that looked exactly like a CEO's apartment in a magazine feature and felt almost entirely empty. This was not a new observation, but it arrived with unusual clarity that night. She stood at the window with a glass of water, not wine, not anything more complicated, and looked at the city below, which was doing what the city always did, continuing, indifferent, generating light and noise and motion, and not caring at all about the mathematics of what had just happened in a glass-walled boardroom on the 22nd floor. She thought about the IV apparatus, about the sedan, about the timeline, about the fact that she had walked past Daniel Reeves dozens or hundreds of times in 14 months and had never seen him, and that he had seen everything. She thought about Sophie's handwriting in the margin of the bird guide. Lives alone, hunts alone, still finds food. She was going to have to become a different kind of person, she understood. Not different in the ways people meant when they said that softened, warmed, improved by adversity into some more agreeable version of themselves. She had no interest in becoming agreeable, but different in the way a structure must sometimes be rebuilt after it has revealed the flaw in its own foundation, not weaker for having been taken apart, but more precisely engineered. She set the water glass down on the windowsill and went to her desk and began to write a memo. It was addressed to the board. It outlined the restructuring of the company's internal security protocols, not the IT security, which was already being reviewed, but the governance security, the human architecture, the assumption that every person in a position of trust had been vetted adequately, and the organizational culture that had made it possible for a CFO to pursue a conspiracy for 14 months without detection. She wrote for 2 hours. The memo ran to 9 pages. She did not mention Daniel once. In the morning, she went to the building, not to the executive floors. She went down. The maintenance level had the particular atmosphere of a space that exists below the threshold of institutional attention. Fluorescent lighting, concrete floors, the smell of industrial cleaner and old machinery, the sound of equipment running on schedules that no one upstairs thought about. There was a quiet competence to it that she found, unexpectedly, more comfortable than the glass and steel above. Daniel was there. He was restocking supply carts for the morning shift, working with the same economy of movement she had now come to recognize as simply how he did everything. Exactly, without waste. He saw her. He did not appear surprised. She stood in the doorway. "I want to offer you a position," she said. "Head of Internal Security. You'd have resources, staff, direct access to the board. The salary would be—" "No," he said. She had expected this. She had not prepared for the abruptness of it. "I haven't given you the terms. I know what the terms would be," he said. He set down the supply box he was carrying, turned to face her. The terms would be visibility, a title, an office, a calendar full of meetings and reporting requirements and institutional relationships that would require me to be, publicly, a person with a role. She waited. "Sophie starts 2nd grade in September," he said. "She's in a school 12 minutes from my apartment. I drop her off at 8:15 and I pick her up at 3:30. Every day." A pause. "The last time I had a visible role, I was unreachable when my wife needed someone to be reachable. She wasn't in danger, it was just the ordinary kind of needing someone, the kind that happens in the evening when you're tired. And I wasn't there." He picked up the box again. "I'm not doing that again." She absorbed this. "There are structures," she said carefully, "that could accommodate—" "I know there are," he said. "I'm not interested in structures." He was not unkind. He was simply final. "I'm good at what I do, Miss Hartwell. I'm good at it precisely because no one knows I'm doing it. The moment I have a title, that's gone." She was quiet for a moment. "And if something like this happens again?" He looked at her. Something that might have been, very briefly. A different expression crossed his face. Not warmth, exactly, but its structural cousin. "I'll still be cleaning the 14th floor," he said. March arrived the way it always did in Chicago, not as a season but as an argument. Cold one day, almost bearable the next. Snow on a Wednesday, 50 degrees on a Friday. The city perpetually negotiating with a sky that hadn't decided. Vivienne had spent 7 weeks rebuilding. The governance restructuring went to the board in February and was approved with 3 modifications she had anticipated and 1 she hadn't, which meant it was a good document. The internal security review identified 4 additional vulnerabilities in the building's access systems, all of which were corrected. The legal proceedings against Garrett and Heller moved forward with the bureaucratic deliberateness of such things. She had learned not to expect speed from processes that had their own gravity. The Voss Group withdrew their acquisition interest formally in late February. Their legal statement used the word regrettable 4 times, which she found satisfying in a way she did not share with anyone. She made 3 changes that were not on any board document. The first, she engaged the same independent pharmacological testing service through a separate account and retained them on an ongoing basis to conduct random verification testing of the company's facilities and medical protocols. The contract was structured so that the testing was anonymous and the service reported to no one but her. The second, she had the company's health insurance package reviewed by an independent broker with specific attention to its provisions for dependent children of facilities and support staff. The review identified 11 gaps. She directed HR to close all 11. The third was a scholarship. It was administered through the company's community foundation, which handled dozens of similar grants, and it was structured as a merit and need award for children of company employees at all levels, with priority given to single-parent households. The first award, for the upcoming academic year, was granted to a 7-year-old girl named Sophie Reeves. She did not tell Daniel about it. She knew he would find out. He found everything out. Eventually, and probably sooner than later. She did not know how he would respond to it. She thought he would probably not respond at all. He would know that she knew he knew, and they would both understand the geometry of the arrangement without having to draw it for each other. She was beginning to find this economy of mutual comprehension, she realized, restful. The morning she saw them in the park, she was not looking for them. She had taken to walking in the mornings not because a doctor had told her to, not because of any resolution she had made, but because 6 weeks of deliberate rebuilding had produced, as its unexpected byproduct, a willingness to spend 20 minutes being somewhere without a phone in her hand. This was not comfortable exactly. It was, she thought, something adjacent to useful. The park was 3 blocks from the Caldwell building. It had a small pond, still half frozen in March, and a series of benches occupied at this hour mostly by dog walkers and a man who sold coffee from a cart and seemed to know everyone who passed. She saw Sophie first. The girl was at the pond's edge, holding a piece of bread and watching the ducks with the focused attention she apparently brought to most things. Daniel stood behind her, hands in his jacket pockets, looking at the same pond, not at his phone, not at the path behind him. At the pond, at his daughter. At the small ordinary theater of ducks and bread and early March light. He was not watching for threats. He was not cataloging. He was simply there, standing behind his daughter while she fed bread to ducks. In a city that was beginning, slowly and with considerable reluctance, to remember that spring was eventually going to arrive. She stopped on the path. He turned, not startled, but with the particular quality of a person who registers presence without alarm. He saw her. She was perhaps 30 feet away. She did not move toward him. He did not move toward her. Sophie, intent on the ducks, had not looked up. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he did something she had not seen him do. He gave a very small, very deliberate nod. Not a greeting exactly. Not acknowledgement of debt or thanks or professional conclusion. Something more precise than any of those. She understood it the way she understood the things he said, not by parsing, but by the pattern. It meant, "I see you. You are counted. That is enough." She returned it. One small, deliberate nod. Sophie threw the last piece of bread. The ducks argued over it briefly. She dusted her hands on her jacket with a practical satisfaction, turned to her father, and said something Vivienne was too far away to hear. He looked down at his daughter. He said something back. Sophie took his hand, and they turned and walked in the opposite direction along the pond path, and Vivienne watched them until they were out of sight. The coffee cart man was watching her from his position 20 feet away. He had the look of someone who had decided not to say anything, but who was composing the story he would tell later. She walked past him toward the building. The snow, she noticed, was gone from the park entirely. What remained were the last gray remnants along the shaded northern edges of the benches, thin and retreating, already losing the argument. The pond reflected the sky. The sky was the particular white of a March morning that hasn't decided yet, not winter and not spring. Just the interval between, which is its own kind of weather. She put her phone in her pocket. She kept walking,